everyone, and welcome to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson, and today I have a guest who is full of common sense and has been a mighty force for education in the state of Texas and subsequently for the entire United States. We have Texas Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath. Thank you so much for being with us. We know you have a zillion things to do.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. It's an honor to be here.
Now, Texas is one of those states that has really been concentrating on what's happening to our students and ensuring that they have high quality instructional material. And we hear the term open education resources. What does that mean in Texas?
Specifically, it means that the state of Texas has invested in essentially textbooks that the owner of the underlying intellectual property of the textbooks is the taxpayer of the state of Texas. And what it allows, because it's open, it's essentially made available freely to anybody that wants to use it.
Okay.
And we as a state over time can modify it based upon feedback that we get both from parents and teachers to make it more and more effective as a tool for classroom instruction.
And then there's the term high quality instructional material. What determines if it's high quality?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a bit of a term of art, but there's two answers to that question. One is you think about evidence of what helps improve the lives of kids. And so we know, for example, for early literacy instruction that you have to teach kids phonics. They have to know how to sound out words and sound out letters, blend the words together. I remember as a kid growing up, both my parents and teachers would just focus on those fundamentals. Well, there's a lot of evidence behind that. It's not just common sense. It's been proven scientifically. And so materials are high quality when they are aligned with that evidence base, when they show that they will in fact help kids learn how to read or learn history or learn science or learn math. And so part of the meaning of the word is, does it work? Is there an evidence base behind it? But the other part of it in Texas law is the State Board of Education, which is an elected body here in Texas, has the final say. And so they have adopted a framework for how they evaluate the quality of materials. They then evaluate the quality of those materials and they approve it. So effectively, if the state board has approved it, it's high quality. It's a statutory definition here in Texas.
Well, the legislature asked TEA, the Texas Education Agency, to develop materials in what's known as the Bluebonnet Learning model. Why do they call it the Bluebonnet Learning?
Well, that's the name that we gave them for it, and that's our state flower. So if you've never been to Texas in the springtime, then you have not experienced the joy of taking your kiddos to an open field that has bluebonnets in bloom, and it is pretty incredibly beautiful when that happens. And so, when you think about the growing of eager young minds, that's the name that we gave the product.
Now, what exactly is the role of the Texas Education Agency?
So we're the state agency in Texas that is given oversight responsibility for public education writ large. There's 1,200 school systems in Texas. Everything is, in fact, bigger in Texas. About 5.5 million souls in Texas public schools. And across probably 9,000 campuses, we have maybe 800,000 people working in our public school systems in Texas. And so, our state is very oriented towards the idea of local control. People who are closest to the problem should be empowered to solve that problem. So we have local school boards. I was in fact a school board member before I took this job, But the state agency essentially provides basic guardrails. So we provide curriculum frameworks to school districts. We help with issues related to teacher certification and broadly recruitment for teachers across the state. We set goals for children. You think about systems of accountability and what we want to be true when our kids graduate from high school. So we also administer the school finance system, so we have to pass out a lot of money to our schools around the state. So it's a wide array of responsibility just to help improve the lives of our kids by improving supports for our schools.
Well, Texas has really been a leader in this field, and a lot of other states seem to take their lead from what Texas does, so it's very influential. But during the pandemic, a lot of parents started noticing some strange things being taught in school. And was that also the case in Texas? And to what extent did the pandemic influence some of the educational legislation?
Yeah, I think that's a keen insight. And I should note that before I am Commissioner of Education, I am a husband and father. So I have 4 young kids. My twins are in first grade, and then I have a third grader and a current 6th grader. And so my current 6th grader was in first grade at the tail end of the pandemic. And so I got a up close and personal view of this as a dad, not just as Commissioner of Education. And I think it is true that parents across the state got insight into what was happening in classrooms that they had never seen before. It was also true in our own home, in the Morath household. And in many cases, what parents saw was fantastic displays of professionalism, but also in many cases, what parents saw was less than what they have come to expect from their schools. The rigor of the lessons was just not there. Kids aren't reading about the basics. They're not reading about the fundamentals. They're not necessarily learning about our shared history here in this country, but instead we're reading silly, inconsequential short stories, sort of, if they were reading at all, as opposed to something else. And again, this was not universally experienced, but it was experienced by a pretty healthy number of families. And again, we saw it in my own household.
Well, I don't know how prevalent it was in Texas, but I had a chance to look at some of the reading material in elementary schools in some other parts of the country, and I was frankly shocked. Instead of talking about the basics of education, they're into all these social issues, LGBT issues, things that confuse kids. Some of the pictures were frankly pornographic. I mean, what would make people think that you should provide that stuff to children?
That is a hard question to answer. And you asked about one of the roles of TEA. One of our roles is to actually investigate issues related to educator misconduct, which unfortunately does happen. We're blessed. We've got largely an army of angels that work in our public schools, but with 800,000 people, even if 1% of them aren't necessarily doing the right thing, that's a lot of people. So it's hard to explain. But what is clear, and what became clear to members of the legislature, was that there was a need to improve the quality of instructional materials that teachers had access to. In many cases, teachers would walk into a classroom and not necessarily even be equipped with textbooks anymore, and then would get on Google or Pinterest or something and download a lesson. And there's a lot of weird stuff on the internet. So the legislature decided to make a major investment in giving teachers these resources, so they did not have to build everything from scratch. But in the process, make sure that the instructional materials that the teachers had access to were a good representation of our standards and our values, making sure that kids are reading stories that are interesting. If you spend any time in examining what we've made available under Bluebonnet Learning and compare it to what is much more common in elementary school, it is as different as night and day as it comes. We have in 5th grade, using Bluebonnet Learning, following an appropriate sequence starting in kindergarten, kids will read Shakespeare, not a Cliff Notes version, but they actually read A Midsummer Night's Dream, the play, and wrestle with Shakespearean language. They will read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the great C.S. Lewis classic. They will read an adapted version of Don Quixote. And in fourth grade, they read the great Robert Louis Stevenson classic, Treasure Island. In third grade, they read the great classic, The Wind in the Willows. These are classics of literature that
They go to
also.
the original material. They don't take somebody's interpretation.
That's exactly right. It's not some modern reimagining of The Wind in the Willows. It's The Wind in the Willows, and it's not just that. It's the reading. When you think about teaching kids to read, part of that, and a very, very critical part of that, is a focus on the fundamentals. This is phonics. This is handwriting, penmanship. It's writing in print and writing in cursive. It's spelling. It's grammar and syntax. So there's a lot of lesson material starting in kindergarten that is really focused on building those fundamentals. And that is an absolutely critical part of learning how to read. But even if you got that, if you never read anything interesting, if you're just reading about somebody's perspective on ice cream, your knowledge of the world and your vocabulary, your ability to wrestle with complex ideas, it doesn't grow. And this is the reason why you want kids to be exposed to reading material that is classical, has stood the test of time, but is also rigorous. And so we have kids reading in a very humanities or interdisciplinary approach where they're reading a little bit about geology and rock formations and astronomy. They're also reading about history. They're going to learn about ancient Greece, and they're going to read about the origins of democracy in Athens, in ancient Greek civilization. And they read stories about ancient Greece in second grade. And I have watched these classrooms happen because we've been piloting the materials for a couple of years. And even in classrooms where you think that, that where kids are in some cases outside of school struggling with some of the most significant struggles kids can have outside of school, inside of school, they are all engaged in learning about Athens. They read about the Battle of Thermopylae in second grade, and Xerxes and Sparta, fighting together. And kids are so engaged because the content is interesting, as opposed to some basic drivel that is often unfortunately used. And so kids can rise to our expectations if we can reach them with that kind of rigor, the kind of things that Noah Webster wrote about in the founding of the country, the kind of things that de Tocqueville saw when he traveled the country in the 1800s. This is what American students were reading for many, many years. And so we're trying to get back to those fundamental those fundamental texts that, again, help kids understand the world around them while also just growing and growing in their literacy.
It's very admirable because I'm sure you're familiar with some of the sixth grade exit exams from 150 to 200 years ago, what you had to know. And it's a little embarrassing today because things have been dumbed down to such a degree. And de Tocqueville was very impressed when he came here and could find a mountain man who could read. Everybody knew how to read. People could tell him about the Declaration of Independence. And American education used to be one of the envies of the world. And what do you think has happened to us? Why have we declined so much?
It's a great question, and I don't think there's any one answer for. But it is very true that we have, in fact, collectively dumbed down our expectations for what our kids can read and do. There was an analysis of textbooks from the 1950s and versus today that compared the rigor level of the textbooks that kids would see in the 1950s versus what they see today, and we've dropped basically a grade level of difficulty. So, and that's just in what's printed. So that never, you think about a teacher that's faced with that, and the teacher receives this textbook, doesn't think that it's below grade level, doesn't think that it's inadequate, and teaches it. Kids work, of course, really hard. Right. Kids rise to the expectations that the adults set for them. But if we've set expectations that are low to begin with, how can we achieve greatness? How can we help kids achieve greatness. I've had the blessing in this country. I was given a phenomenal education from my public school here in Texas. Came out of high school with 36 hours of college credit, graduated in 2.5 years from my university. And then I started at .com, and it was a catastrophic failure. we raised a bunch of money, and we lost all of it. But I was equipped for the rigors of the American dream. I picked myself up, I dust myself off, and I tried again. And my next company was vastly more successful. But the American dream is not for the faint at heart. You've got to be, and this idea that everybody should get a trophy and that we should just constantly cater to the emotional needs in the moment. Character comes in with struggle. You've got to build perseverance, and so we cannot treat the education of our children in ways that doesn't give them the opportunity to grow in this way, to achieve at high level.
Technology in education, virtual reality, AI. A lot of people have identified a lot of problems associated with those. What do you think are the good things that are associated with those?
Well, I mean, we have to be cautious with the use of technology. I'm a bit of a Luddite. I'm more than fine having kids outside reading from 100-year-old books. But technology is a tool that can be used. I mean, if you think about the arc of technology, pencils are technology. They're just very, very old technology. And so in some cases, the technology can help us be more productive. But in many cases, it is simply a distraction. So you think about the power that can be given to individuals with just possession of a modern smartphone. From the palm of your hand, you can basically access pretty much anything that's ever been written down on the internet, for good and for ill. And that's a tremendously powerful tool, but it's also deeply distracting, especially when combined with the way that social media algorithms work. And so I don't think smartphones really have any place in schools at all. But there are, I think, some use cases where, if used in a very appropriate way, very narrow, that it can help. I mean, when I was a kid, the technology of the day were these old overhead projectors, and so teachers would write on the overhead projectors. They would present them on screen, and I can tell you that sometimes that only served to distract from the instructional delivery, and then sometimes it was really valuable. And so you get a lot of the same things with some of the new stuff. We have vendors that are constantly trying to sell things to schools, and sometimes the vendor benefits, and that's the only one. But sometimes it can deliver real value in the educational experience. It's just you have to be cautious and smart. You have to possess common sense. What problem is this solving? Does this actually improve the quality of learning, or does it distract from it? Because we don't need more entertainment. We need more teaching.
Well, I must admit, when I was a youngster, I was enthralled by television. I just wanted to watch television all the time. And when my mother made me start reading, I was not a happy person. But interestingly enough, after a while, all of a sudden, I wasn't the first one to sit down on the spelling bee because I was always looking at words. And, my papers that I wrote were much better because I was looking at grammar and syntax. And everything became better because you had to use your imagination.
Yep.
As opposed to watching television where someone else has already used their imagination. So there are probably some good things that can be done, but I'm not sure that anything beats reading a good book.
That truer words have never been spoken, and the entire arc of what you just described just made me think of the Morath household last night, while we were getting kids off of television, making sure that they are doing their homework, making sure that they are spending time reading. And there's a little bit of wailing and gnashing of teeth, and then there's a great deal of joy and engagement that comes after you have delved into the written word.
Absolutely. Now, there are a lot of techniques that are being introduced that are supposed to be superior to the things that have been done traditionally. One of them is three cueing. I suspect you're not a big fan of that.
No, nor am I in medicine a big fan of the use of leeches to cure blood poisoning. So unfortunately, there are a lot of ideologies that seem to afflict classrooms that have no evidence base behind it. And three cueing is really one of them. It's a technique that has a lot of followers, um, uh, and it says we should ask kids to answer this question of does when they say a word out loud after having seen it in print, does it sound right? That's one of the cues that you would ask. And people who look at the evidence base on reading instruction know what you have to do is you have to get them to sound out the words, or the sound out the letters in the word. They have to understand that when you see a D shape, it makes a D sound, and kids have to sound that out and blend them together. And that is how reading happens. And three cueing is generally not how it happens. It's really kind of frustrating that this is not really that controversial for anybody that looks at evidence. This is pretty well established, but we do still have a pretty large number of people that instead of following what evidence informs them, they are guided by feeling or emotion or fad, and to the detriment of our kids.
Well, earlier you mentioned Greek history, and it seems like we have no problem with looking at how they thought, what their philosophies were, how they had a god for this and a god for that. And yet, when you talk about Christianity and the things behind it, a lot of people get very alarmed. How can you teach the history of a country like the United States of America without including religion?
Yeah, you can't. It's foundational to our country. It's foundational even to our language. I mean, you and I are having this conversation in the English language, and the sheer number, like the volume of idioms of the English language that have their origin in the King James Bible is pretty overwhelming. So, a man after my own heart, don't split the baby. I mean, these are like common phrases that if you use them in casual parlance, and you expect the other person to know what you're talking about, if you've not provided them,
golden rule.
Of course. Where did the golden rule come from? Well, I mean, the golden rule came from some preachers in the time of colonial America that identified this phrase out of the King James Bible as the golden rule, and that's where the term the golden rule came from. Of course, the actual idea of the golden rule way predates that, and of course comes from the Sermon on the Mount, and that in and of itself comes from teachings of the Hebrew Scripture, and this is we do our children a disservice by not giving them a chance to understand the language that they speak and where these terms come from. I mean, the story of the Good Samaritan in and of itself is a great example of this. We have Good Samaritan laws in this country. There is a Good Samaritan law. It's what it's called, a Good Samaritan law on the books in Texas. And what is that law designed to do? It is designed to make sure that when you render aid to a stranger, to someone in need, that you don't have to worry about negative repercussions coming to you. Well, why is that? What is the etymology of the word Samaritan? Well, it's a region. It was a group of people, and there's actually an entire backstory to the idea of the Good Samaritan.
The Jews didn't like them very much, did they?
It was a group of people that really disliked one another. Like two groups of people that really disliked one another, and it gets to the concept of who is my neighbor. What does it mean to help those in need? So these are foundational ethical principles to our country's history, to the history of Western civilization. And there are also laws on the books. I think about so many things that inform our laws. Why do we have bankruptcy laws that allow for your debts to be forgiven after 7 years? That comes from one place in particular that originated that. And so, do we understand the world that we live in and what is shaping it, or don't we? And so this is why, and this is, I mean, kids are going to be exposed to these concepts from many different faiths. If you are looking into the night sky and trying to identify that red planet that is in the sky, the word Mars comes from something. It originated somewhere. So we want to make sure that we give our kids a breadth of education so that they can understand the language that we speak and understand the laws that govern our country, and what has gotten us to this point. It's also important for kids to learn about the mistakes of the human hearts, because we keep largely doing the same things we've been doing for thousands of years, and understanding our shared history is an important part of being an educated American.
Amen. I always say history gives you your identity, which gives you your beliefs. And if you break that chain, you become like a leaf blowing in the wind, which
Absolutely.
happens, unfortunately, to so many of our college students. They're picked up by whatever the fad is that's going along, have no idea what they're talking about, out there protesting and doing strange things.
Yeah, there was a yes, I completely agree. The need to establish some grounding in the major ideas of our country, of Western civilization. It's foundational to both elementary and secondary education.
Well, you must. I know in your curriculum, you have included some foundational issues about faith and Christianity and how. What's been the feedback?
We get a lot of feedback. We do get both positive and negative feedback about some of these concepts. And what we are trying to do is to ensure that what we've provided is a faithful representation of what is known from major stories in literature, from what is known from major elements of history. We have to build textbooks in Texas that align to the state standards adopted by the Texas State Board of Education, and so we have done that. We've also been piloting these materials for some time in small doses in classrooms around the state of Texas, and the impact that it has on the classrooms are pretty profound. Teachers report students with much higher degrees of engagement. They're dialed into hearing about this. They're also able to connect, especially when stories of our collective faith history are part of the discussion. You're able to help kids engage with that in very appropriate ways. In fifth grade, there's a unit on poetry, and kids will read classics from, say, Walt Whitman. And this builds on multiple grade levels in fourth grade. And so kids will also read some of the classics of Langston Hughes. But they will also read, among other things, they will read the one of the most popular poems in all of human history, which is Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. This is so referenced in so many cultural contexts, in literature, in music, in movies, in television, in common conversation, in events that people hold. And what have our students had a chance to really unpack that the same way we'd want them to unpack the work of the transcendentalists and Whitman and Thoreau. And so this is something that we want to ensure that we offer a well-rounded education, that that our kids get this. And this is not all that they will read. They will also get excerpts of relevance, say, from the Bhagavad Gita. So think about Oppenheimer's observation after the Trinity test bomb explosion. And he says, "Behold, I have become death, destroyer of worlds." He is, in fact, quoting from Hindu scripture there. And so we provide kids with this context so that they understand, again, the aspects of history and literature that they are going to be exposed to for the remainder of their lives.
Now, you've also included, in fact, I think it's required by the legislature, that children be taught about patriotism and Texas history, as well as the entire country.
Yes, absolutely. So there's a unit in kindergarten that kids can read. The unit is called America, Our Great Country. And this is kindergarten. And kids learn about Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt. They will actually learn, you think about those as the four Mount Rushmore presidents. They will actually learn about Mount Rushmore in the lesson. They learn about the origins of Washington, D.C. They get some preliminary exposure to the idea of separation of powers. So the legislative branch, the judicial branch, the executive branch, these things that are foundational to our republic. Even before that, though, they get exposed to the idea of kings and queens. And it's important because we want to make sure our kids understand we don't like kings. This is not what we stand for. And there's reasons for this. So in first grade, kids will learn about the shot heard round the world. They will learn about the Boston Tea Party and several things are critical to the origins of the country. They learn about key American symbols, the flag and what it stands for, and why it's designed the way it is. The bald eagle, the Liberty Bell, and this is part of it. They learn about America's tremendous role in World War II and the Greatest Generation, and what we did to defeat the scourge of Nazism, to try to bring an end to the Holocaust. They get to see so many things about our collective history as Americans that is exceptional, because America is an exceptional country, and the arc of that history.
Isn't it interesting that so many of the young college kids today don't seem to know that material? They don't. They don't know about World War II. They don't know about the Holocaust. They don't know any of this stuff. How can they get through school without learning this stuff?
Yeah, these are understanding the travails of the rest of the world and what the founding fathers were able to accomplish in what is truly unprecedented. Because you can go back to the time of Athens and study Greek democracy, but a third of the entire adult population of ancient Greece was enslaved. Right. So the work that we have done to improve the arc of history, and there's no reason to shy away from the problems that we have had, but also to celebrate that we shall overcome. We have overcome so much, and so that arc of American history, and the works of the abolitionists, the work of people ensuring equal protection under the law. These are stories that our kids get to read about in their reading block. Technically it's reading. So you're mixing literature and history and art and science all together.
And when you present it that way, it makes a lot more sense. I mean, a topic like slavery, which is very difficult for some people to talk about, because they want people to think that it's something unique to the United States of America. Of course, it's not. It's been prevalent throughout the world, throughout the history of mankind. And today there's more slaves in the world than there ever have been. But what is unique about America is the fact that we had so many people who were vehemently against slavery that we fought a bloody civil war to get rid of it. And, the whole story of the abolitionists, the Underground Railroad, the corporation, it really is a very inspiring story. So 1619 CRT, they just take the bad part and they try to build on that and try to make that the identity of the nation. When in fact, the identity of the nation is utilizing knowledge and faith to rid ourselves of a malignity. And I think if our students kind of understand that, it gives them a whole new light in which to look at things, and they're not so easily deceived into thinking that this is an evil country that they should hate.
Yeah, it's we attempt to ensure that kids get exposed via the written word to some of these great ideas of our past. There's two interrelated lessons related to the War of 1812, which is unfortunately a lesser known war in our history, but the origins of the Star Spangled Banner. And students will actually write. So it's a lot of grammar work, a lot of handwriting, a lot of spelling and penmanship, while they're also doing a full poetry analysis of what Francis Scott Key wrote about. And this happens in second grade.
Wow.
And I talked to some parents. I talked to my relatives, and they're like, they can't believe this is happening in second grade. But I've seen it. I've seen it. Whether kids are coming from the wealthiest households, whether kids are coming from the poorest households, if we have given them what is really well designed, that is fascinating stories again of literature and history and art and science, they rise to that occasion and wrestle with these like what you would want any group of young patriots. I can remember sitting in a second grade classroom, and this was a very poor part of an inner city area in the state, and they were coming off of a lesson on ancient Greek civilization. And they had the kids sit around in a little small group setting, and the question that the teacher asked was, what form of government did the Greeks give us? And so all the hands shot up. These are very excited little second graders. So teacher asked one of the kids to come to the front of the room and said, "What is it?" And he said, "Democracy." And he said, what is it? What does democracy mean? Democracy is where you get to vote for your leaders. This is what I heard a kid say. Now, they will also learn the finer points of the difference between direct democracy and our republic. And this is what they get in the content. But so often, second grade classrooms will actually just sit around and read about their thoughts on ice cream. And if you want a group of adults to really be focused on meeting only their own personal needs, have them read stories that orient them to that over and over and over again. But if you want them to follow in the traditions of American exceptionalism for the next 250 years, it's important that we give them a broad liberal arts education on these topics.
Well, it certainly sounds like you have done the work that's necessary to do to really make education fun and exciting. When I was a bad student, I wasn't really paying much attention to what was going on. But once the fire was lit, I couldn't wait to go to school every day. I couldn't wait to get into my books. I was always reading. And what a difference it made. Completely turned my life around. And I don't know anyone who's been successful who can't point to a teacher or a school administrator who played a big role in their lives. Such an important area. And what you're doing helps not only the students, but it helps the teachers too. Because, so many teachers are very talented and they come in with great ideals, and then they get beaten down by the system. And, we wind up with textbooks that have all kinds of ideological things in them that probably shouldn't be part of teaching. And they have to teach it whether they like it or not. And I think if they followed the model that you're presenting here and that you've been working on, it will make a huge difference in our country and also help us to get away from some of the partisanship and stuff that's tearing our nation apart. So you're playing a big role in that. And just as a parting word, how do you recommend that we fight ignorance? It's our big problem in our country right now.
Well, this is what I felt called to do. My background was not specifically in education. I ran a software company, but I was a big brother for about 10 years, part of the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. I'm sure you're familiar with it. My first little, we were matched for about 6 years, and he wanted to apply for a job, his first job when he was 16. So he comes to my house, sits down at the computer, and we're doing an online job application for a fast food chain in North Texas. And he couldn't fill out the job application without my help. His level of literacy was not sufficient. And you don't know why the Lord has you on the path that He does. But I do know that I sold my software company and ran for the school board because I could not let that happen to another one of my brothers and sisters ever again. Our system of education in this country, this is the thing that will deliver on the promise of the American dream. It's what equips our young people for this. It's what will sustain this grand experiment in self-government for another 250 years.
Yeah.
So the ensuring that we give kids a broad, non-ideological education, allowing them to see the great ideas of man, to see the challenges that we have, to see how we've been motivated by issues of faith, how we've been motivated by issues of finances, how we've reacted to that, both with greatness and with weakness.
Yes.
This is what is necessary to fight ignorance, and so ensuring this kind of well-rounded education is what we are attempting to do in Texas.
I'm sure I join many others in thanking you for the effort that you've put forth already and what you will continue to do to educate the young people of our country. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carson. It's my privilege.
Well, I'm sure you join me in thanking Commissioner of Education Mike Morath of Texas. What an inspiring individual who dedicates his life to educating our young people and improving our society. And I hope everybody will work in their sphere of influence. Get involved with the school board. You go to a school board meeting and the only people there are the school board members. The audience should be full. And people need to be involved from the very baseline to teaching our children, because that will make a big difference to the future of our country. So that's it for today. Spread the word about our podcast. Make sure that you subscribe to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, so you don't miss an episode. We love those 5-star evaluations. And tell your family and friends. And remember the cornerstones: faith, liberty, community, and life. See you next week.